Today I am replacing the front brake pads and rotors on my 2007 Chrysler Town & Country. This vehicle has rear drum brakes. Some other 2000 Chrysler Town & Countries have rear disc brakes. That definitely changes what parts you need on the front, so make sure when you're ordering parts you know if it's drums or discs on the rear. First thing you want to do, jack up the vehicle, take off the front wheels. Anytime I jack up the vehicle, I always set the rear emergency brake, especially in my driveway because it's tilted. Safety is always of utmost importance. Some vehicles, depending on how many times the brakes have been done, might have little clips like these holding the rotor in place. They're basically from the factory so that the rotors will stay on while they put the caliper in place. If you can remove it without damaging it and reuse it, fine. It doesn't need to be put back into place. First thing you want to do is take these two 12mm bolts out so that you can lift the caliper out of the way. Once you have those two 12s loose, you can pull the caliper up out of the way. Make sure it's not dangling by the brake hose because that can damage the brake hose. I usually use a brake pad when I come in here and compress the caliper. You need to compress it all the way in so that the fatter new brake pads will fit in place. Do that using channel locks. If you're having a hard time depressing the piston back into the caliper, sometimes what I will do is come up and loosen the brake fluid reservoir cap. When you're squeezing that caliper, you're pushing all this fluid back up, and sometimes it gets under too much pressure, so you're sitting there fighting yourself. You also want to make sure when you're done with the brake job that your fluid is level and where it's supposed to be. If somebody's topped off the fluid, it can overflow out the top of the cap and make a mess, so you want to make sure you don't have brake fluid running loose under your hood because it eats away at stuff, and also you don't want any contaminants in your brake fluid, so it really shouldn't be topped off because as this level goes down, it's a wear indicator of your brake pads wearing, but some shops still do check and top it off. So in that case, when you compress both your calipers, it'll be overfull and overflow. After loosening that cap, it's easier for me to compress this piston. You should get it pretty much so it's all the way flush back inside the caliper. Now that I have the piston completely depressed, I slide the caliper up here out of the way so that I can take these 21mm bolts loose so I can get the bracket out and then the rotor off. Once you have this bracket off, we want to pull these slides out and make sure that you lubricate them, that they move freely. If they jam up, then they can make your brake pads wear unevenly. With the bracket off, we can swap rotors. New rotors normally come with a coating from the factory that can cause smoke and stink, so make sure you spray them down with some brake clean and wipe them clean before installing them. I usually use some kind of Silk Glide to lube these up. You just want to make sure they move freely in and out because it's a floating caliper. And this grease can get grubby and old, and then these don't move as freely. So, once those are lubricated and your new rotor's in place, then you can put the bracket back on. Once you have the caliper bracket back in place with the new rotor, you can put the pads in. If your pads come with a wear indicator clip like this, make sure that it goes in the direction of rotation. Basically what this guy does is when your pad wears all the way down, it scrapes the rotor, so you'll hear annoying scraping noises and know to replace your brakes. So we're going to put this guy on the outside so it's going in the direction it's supposed to. Also make sure your hardware is all in place. Some new pad kits come with new hardware. You just want to make sure nothing dropped down when you were taking anything apart, so that basically helps to keep your brakes quiet. So now that we have the new pads in place, and the piston totally depressed on the caliper, you can slide this over the new set, making sure that you line it up. Start the bolts by hand. Might have to wiggle a bit. This isn't something you ever want to start with an impact because you don't want to cross thread your bolts. So we'll tighten these 12 millimeters down, then we'll go depress the brake pedal so that the piston comes out and your brakes are set, ready for a test drive. If you don't depress your brake pedal the first time you drive into the street, your brake pedal will go all the way to the floor as it pumps that piston out, and you could drive into your neighbor's house. So that is probably the most important step. Make sure you pump up your brake pedal so you're pumping these pistons out. See how the first time I did that, it went all the way to the floor? It's still going to the floor, and now it's where it's supposed to be. Next, we will double check the fluid in the reservoir, make sure there's not a mess and it's at the level it's supposed to be. This guy is looking good. It's at the max line. A little grubby, but we will bring it in for a brake fluid flush sometime soon. When you go to put the wheel back on, make sure that it is centered on this hub and not cockeyed. My van has the hubcaps that go on with the lug nuts through the hubcap, so you have to put the hubcap on with the lug nuts. Don't put the wheel on and then have to take the lug nuts back on so you can put the hubcap on. It's a stupid design, but thank you, Chrysler. Make sure that the little divot in here for the valve stem is in place. The torque spec for my vehicle, let me look it up. It also helps to tighten the lug nuts in a star pattern instead of a circle so that you don't get the wheel on cockeyed. Once you have the wheels back on the ground, my torque spec is 110 foot-pounds. Torque all of the lug nuts. Then I always test drive the vehicle and double check the torque again. Better safe than sorry, and that's it.